Hello, this is Matthew from the Nations of Sanity project. I'm speaking once again with Urza from the Free Haven project. It has a different name, but that's the English translation for it. This is actually a kind of part two. We've already had one conversation, and I'll put a link to that in the description for anyone that wants to check that out. And so this is our second conversation. I've had a chance to read a book that Urza has written on anarcho-capitalism. We have basically some things to discuss about that and other aspects of voluntarism and the concept of self-ownership. And I'll just pass it over to Urza now to introduce himself to everyone listening.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much. I am very glad that we can talk again. And as the last time, I want to tell everybody that the English is not my native language, so it's quite hard for me, but I'm generally happy to do that because I like to step out of my comfort zone. So if I will say something grammatically incorrect, I'm sorry for that. I'm doing my best. I want to really thank you that you read my book, that you made some corrections there. So if we will finish it somehow, I can even tell to followers of Free Haven that the book probably will be soon somehow. Well, I don't know if soon, but one day it will be out in English already. So, and thank you very much, Matthew, for that, because it's very much your job.
No problem. And
I also want to thank to other translations who were translating this. It's Sarah Balonova and Martin Panek. They helped with that.
Yeah, it isn't just me. I've just done a part of it, and I'm more than happy to help out. And for people listening, the English translation of that will be available soon. And when that is, I'll update the description on here so that people can link to it and check it out for themselves. So, and I'll also put a link to any people who speak Czech Republic who could also check it out for the one that obviously exists at the moment. But there'll be an English translation available soon for people to check out, which will be good. And it is a great book as well. As I say, I haven't quite got to the bonus chapters, but I've read the main body of the book and the main chapters, and it's very comprehensive description. I mean, anyone who wants to, particularly people that are new to kind of anarcho-capitalism or libertarianism even, and the principles, is a great introduction. It really explains it to you in a way that you can understand quite easily, and then it goes through a lot of historical examples and practical applications, and various scenarios as well, where it compares to what anarcho-capitalism would offer, comparing to what we get now in our statist societies. So it was a great book, and I highly recommend it. So
thank you.
No problem. I have some pushback that I come from, to be honest, it's kind of a little bit of pushback that I have with almost all anarcho-capitalists to some degree or another, because as I said in our last conversation, I don't personally identify as an anarcho-capitalist. I identify as a voluntarist, which many people think is the same thing. And to anyone listening, it is almost pretty much the same thing. I mean, we're both kind of basically saying that we accept the concept of individual self-ownership and the moral principle that comes from that, which is the non-aggression principle. I suppose I don't personally identify as anarcho-capitalist because I don't like the economic connotations of capitalism. I like to present voluntarism as a kind of economically neutral. So someone who wants to live in a commune, for example, who's very anti-capitalist in their own mind, although as your book goes into details, they might be anti-capitalist because they might have a different definition of what capitalism is, and that's something we should also, I think,
that's very usual,
discuss. Yeah. So there is that as well, and sometimes it can be a bit of a pedantic wordplay, because I've encountered many people who've had a definition of capitalism that basically makes it indistinguishable from voluntarism, and basically just talks about respect. If you respect property rights, it's capitalism, even if you're living in a commune.
Yes, this is quite neat, because I also identify myself as voluntarist and anarcho-capitalist, so this is exactly my case.
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, a lot of anarcho-capitalists do make that point, and it's a good point as well to make, because but I think because capitalism does have, whether it's right or wrong, it does have other connotations in most people's minds. It is connected to, say, business and profit and markets and all of those things. And even though those things obviously exist, or certainly should exist, on a foundation of property rights and respecting property rights, it's not necessarily tied to capitalism, the respect for property rights, in the same way, in everybody's minds in an equal way. You know, people conceptualize this differently. So I just think voluntarism is certainly a term that's less likely to be misunderstood, although like every term, and it still needs clarification, because I don't think there's a word in the English language or in the Czech language or any human language that can't be twisted or misunderstood.
Yes, of course.
You know, but yeah, so for anyone listening, both voluntarism and anarcho-capitalism basically identify with the concept of individual self-ownership and the non-aggression principle and property rights, which I would say come from that concept. Although I think some anarcho-capitalists, I don't know if you have this view, but some anarcho-capitalists kind of do it the other way around. So like from my conceptualization, it's self-ownership, and from that you get property rights. But I've heard other anarcho-capitalists say, no, you start with property rights and your self-ownership is just a property right. I don't like jive with that, because then that kind of says that you're property, and there's all kinds of connotations that I think are wrong with that kind of way of doing it. But as long as they kind of have the same understanding of self-ownership at the end of the day, then I don't spend too much time arguing with them about it. But it's a point worth noting to particularly other people listening, because I do hear people talk about the concept of like property, and we've spoken in our last conversation about things like voluntary slavery and stuff like that, which is actually another thing that we could speak about. But I'll tell you one thing I would like to kick off with, actually, and this came to me the other day when I was watching a documentary about the Irish potato famine, and it reminded me of an objection that, let's say, left libertarians or communists or people that kind of oppose the anarcho-capitalist ideology have objected often to land ownership. And often when I'm having conversations with people about property rights, people that oppose, say, property rights in some way will often go to land ownership when they're trying to point to what they see as an unjustified property ownership. And my problem in having those arguments is I sometimes agree with those objections. They'll often point to ownership claims over land, and I'm like, yeah, that is invalid. That is wrong. And a lot of the land enclosure and land ownership claims, particularly that occurred in Ireland during the Irish potato famine, and I don't know how familiar you are with that, was a good example of where I would be in total agreement with, say, the communists or people of that nature that want to say that that was totally wrong, that these people claimed ownership, property right claims over these big areas of land that, you know, and like the land ownership, we've had it in England as well. Like there was this basically enclosure movement where all these peasants that were living on land all of a sudden were told they were living on this lord's land and they owed them rent. And obviously the government do a similar thing with taxation, where they're basically saying, okay, well, you're living on our land, and this invalid ownership claim. Now, my point that I always make to the communists who might bring this up is I say, yeah, I agree with you on that, but that's not valid property rights, and that doesn't invalidate property rights. That's just an example of how property rights needs to be properly understood and applied, because there are invalid claims, and I would say not all, but many of these examples of land ownership would be examples of that. What do you think on that?
I definitely agree. Well, I definitely think that you can own a land. That's, for me, absolutely the same as you can own anything else. Like, as you can own any other, let's say, natural resources, you can own a land as well. So as much you can own wood or stone or whatever, you can also own a land. So this is, for me, the same thing. There are some resources around us. That resources are somehow limited, and land is one of them. You are right that very often it's done wrongly. I mean, for example, at feudalism or so on, that some people claimed that they said that they own a land, but I don't think they were legitimate owners of the land. On the other hand, I think that current states are doing it even more sophisticated, because they don't do this, as you compare this with the taxation. I don't think it's exactly the same, because our current politicians are not saying that they are owning the land, because I think that it would be bad for their PR, and that the people wouldn't like the imagination that they are not owners of the land, and that the state politics are owning the land like kings, like medieval kings. And medieval kings had some support of people also, because they were claimed as they are kings from the God's will, and the people were trusting that the kings are. The people trusted that the kings are something more, so they could keep their ownership of their land, and the society was built like that. Some peasant was just lesser than the king. On the other hand, today we are somehow more far, so we quite believe that the people are basically equal. I mean, equal by their rights. So the politician is not somehow better human, or human who should rule me from some God's will or something like that. So if current politicians would say that they own all the land, I think that people wouldn't like this. So it's officially set like the state is saying, okay, you are owning the land, but there are some laws, and you have to follow them, which is practically, from libertarian point of view, making them owners of that land, but they are not saying it openly. So I think here is it's a bit different story, because the politician says you are owning your garden, you are owning your yard and your house, but you are allowed to do there just what we allow you, or what we don't forbid. But the medieval stuff, it was like they just said, okay, we are owning all the land, you are there on our land, so you are practically a slave. But I agree that none of these two cases it's legitimate. So I think I agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, I was only really linking them with regards to the arbitrary nature and the invalid property ownership claims involved. But yeah, you're right. It's not an exact equivalent, because the government claim over you is far more reaching than just that. They don't just say they own the land. I mean, they all essentially government claim an ownership over you, essentially. But
it's just doing it. I think this is very very smart and very bad for us who like freedom, because the politicians are not saying that they are owning you or your land. The politicians are basically saying that you are owning your land, and they are not even saying anything about who is owning the body. But in the end, they are saying what you can do with your body, and what you can do with your land, and what you can do with your property. So
yeah,
unfortunately, they are practically owning it, but they are not saying it, because if they would say it like this, I believe that the people wouldn't like it very much.
Yeah. No, they don't say it overtly. It's just the implications of how things are. It's a little bit like the government uses linguistic garnish, like when it's like things that the government own, they call it public property.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So like, oh no, it's not us that own it. You own it. You know, you the public. We're just your humble servants. You know, it's to create that kind of imagery in people's minds, even though it's like, you know, so yeah, no, yeah, that's a valid point. But that for me, that ties to a larger point. And yeah, I mean, that was the main point I wanted to make with regards to the land versus property thing. Although my conceptualization of land ownership and property ownership might differ from yours slightly. I suspect it doesn't differ in a significant way, because we both seem to agree where the line distinguishes arbitrary ownership claims from valid ownership claims, and how we get there. So I think we're on the same page on that. But I think the point is well made that we do need to have that distinction. And whether it's not just when it comes to how we properly define, property rights and how people can rightfully own property and what have you, but also with regards to the non-aggression principle, within itself. And this kind of, funny enough, this ties a little bit to one area of pushback that I did have with regards to the book and kind of how anarcho-capitalism is presented in itself. And it also kind of ties a little bit to my own project, the Nations of Sanity project, and this idea of establishing the non-aggression principle as some kind of law through a peace agreement, because I do have a bit of resistance to the idea that it's a little bit like my dispute I had with David Friedman when we had this whole thing about when I was saying that, anarcho-capitalism, when he was saying that drug laws, for example, could exist in anarcho-capitalism if, enough people decided to employ their security forces in that way, but it wouldn't be likely or advisable and all the rest of it. But my issue with that, and my kind of my position on the whole freedom movement is that we really need to just, I feel like a lot of, sorry, I'm not articulating this well. I feel like a lot of anarcho-capitalists have this idea that we can kind of let the market do its thing and we can almost make government like irrelevant. But I feel like we need something more than that. We need something kind of like in place of government, like a peace agreement or a law or something, where we kind of have, even if it's like a relatively low resolution, so we can have like a universal standard, we need to have our lines in the sand. I kind of mentioned this in our last conversation.
Something like constitution, like can I imagine something like a libertarian constitution or not?
Similar, yeah, but the only thing I would emphasize with it would be, like, for example, how it would be different from constitutions like the US Constitution or whatever, is it wouldn't be under the authority of like any ruler. It would be like I would present it as a peace agreement, like a treaty, more like a treaty than a constitution. Like, these are the terms of peace between us. This is and because that's although I present it as like a peace agreement in terms of peace, what you're effectively doing is making law that way, because the term saying these are the terms of peace is kind of the same as saying this is the law.
But it sounds to me a bit like social contract, or just or not, or I'm not sure if I understand.
It depends. It depends how you're defining social contracts. I mean, it's different from what people talk about social contract now. I don't mean
this social contract of the state. I mean, like, if this is what you are proposing, if it is social contract just with different content than the actual one.
Potentially, yeah. I've never. The reason why I couldn't give you an immediate yes or no is because I hadn't thought of it that way. But I suppose. Yeah, I mean, yeah. To clarify that the terms are different, but I suppose it's like a social contract. I mean, like I say, I do conceptualize it as a peace agreement. Like, say, let's all have a peace agreement. Let's overthrow the rule of our governments and all these other illegitimate ruling bodies with this peace agreement that basically sets this law, like this universal law, which I say has to be the non-aggression principle. And that law in itself, or that peace agreement, this terms of peace, would make all the ruling governments as ruling entities illegal and would force them to become what I would call voluntary collective. So you could still have, this collective infrastructure, but there's no ruling body. There's no authority to rule over others. Anyone that's part of any kind of socialist style program would only be part of it voluntarily, all of that kind of thing. These are the kind of, go on, sorry.
I'm not sure. How can I imagine this peaceful contract? Because I suppose that the peaceful contract, it has to have some words, like some sentences. It's some document, yes. But who would create this document? Where the document would be, and mainly, if somebody doesn't agree with some words or some formulation there, and he wishes to change it or edit it, how can he do that? Because for example, when you have I don't know, blockchain, you can always fork. If you have this document, the document, let's say it will be created by some people, some other people would contract. So I can imagine it starts as some petition with a lot of signatures, okay, but some people doesn't sign it in the form. Let's say there will be we had some disputation about if you can have voluntary slavery or not. So imagine that in the society there would be few versions of the property rights of the peaceful agreement, and there would be few versions of it, and each of them would have some support of some people. What then? What to do with it, or how it would be created?
Okay, yeah. So basically, the way I feel, the way I present it through my project is it needs to be presented as like a 3-part agreement. So it needs to have 3 essential parts to it. And the way I break it down is part 1 is like the basic agreement to have the non-aggression principles of law. So to say that we're defining crime by the concept of individual self-ownership. And that as a basic agreement gives you like something, but you like you alluded to, you've still got these fuzzy edges, you've still got these slight different conceptualizations, although you've got like this rough kind of I wouldn't say rough, but you've got this principle that it's all attached to, but there's obviously slightly different conceptualizations, as you mentioned. So what part 2 is to deal with that, which is what I call the lines in the sand. And the way I try to describe this is to use the metaphor, and I don't know if I mentioned this when I spoke before, of the desert and the grassland.
Yes, we were absolutely talking about it. But
Yeah.
I am not so much asking about the content of the document. I am asking about what to do with the document. Let's say that you create a document, and let's say that you have a lot of people who agree exactly with that your document. But then I come and I create another document, which would be really similar to yours. Like it would be still libertarian paper, and there would be a lot of people who agree with my document. And those 2 documents would be mostly the same, 95% the same, but 5% different.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, in my idea of the society, there would be that free market laws and free market arbiters and free market polycentric law, which would be created from the bottom to the top. And as there would be more companies who would be enforcing the law, these companies would have their laws, and there would be just free market competition also about law. But from what you are saying, I suppose that that's not it, because you want to have there some peaceful agreement which would be under or above all this.
Well, yeah, but the purpose of the agreement, because this whole line in the sand thing and this whole the reason why I use that desert grassland metaphor in that is because I try to basically say, look, you know, we've got, and in my conceptualization, like for anyone listening who doesn't know this metaphor that I use, I basically say, look, the grassland represents what's definitely not a violation of the non-aggression principle. The desert represents what definitely is, and the in-between area where you're not quite sure as you walk from one to the other, as it, you know, one slowly becomes the other, geographically speaking, this in-between area that's hard to define is what I would define as like the grey area. And what I'm kind of saying is I'm saying we need to have a universal peace agreement that deals with what we're going to call the black and white, where we're going to draw the line in the sand and say, this is definitely the desert. We don't care. Well, like we will fight you over this kind of thing. You know, I mean, we're saying this is the line in the sand. Like whatever the issue is, this is where we will fight you over it. And then the grey area, we might still disagree with you, but because there's some kind of reasonable doubt that we concede, then we will basically say, okay, well, we might not agree with you, we might not want to voluntarily be part of what you're to do with, but we're not going to use violence against you, and we can't use violence against you. This peace agreement will basically say we can only enforce within this black and white region, and then obviously the grassland stuff we have to, like, let carry on with. Sorry.
I see there one problem, and is that if you have the grassland and the desert, even if we would at some points agree that this is desert and this is grassland, we don't need to agree where exactly to draw the line, because even if at many points we can both say this is desert and in many points say this is grassland, it doesn't mean that we both would draw the line at the exactly same place. We can draw two lines. Those lines would be somehow differing the desert from what is between grassland and desert, but we don't need to feel the same place where is the line. Even if both lines would have approximately differ something what is gray area from the desert, but those lines doesn't have to lie exactly on each other. They can lie a few meters from each other, and I feel this is a bit problematical, because what then? Because you can't arbitrarily say that some of us is correct and the other is not, because.
Well, I mean, the problem is I actually, and I'm not trying to get away from that question, but I see the bigger problem in not doing that, because it's like what you're talking about with the anarcho-capitalist way of saying, well, we'll do it from the bottom up. We'll let law be made through the market mechanisms. But the problem with that is, but what, with no limit, with no, is it still going to be according to the non-aggression principle and property rights loosely, or is there going to be no? Because the problem is, if we don't ever draw any line, what's to stop it going to statism again,
of course,
feudalism
that's
again?
The problem of this attitude is exactly what you say, that in the end, in the anarcho-capitalist society, there can be some deviations from the non-aggression principle, and it can end like that. You have there 99% non-aggression principle and 1% deviation, which is clearly violating non-aggression principle, and the society is living by that. This can't happen, and I agree that it can be a problem, but if we want to compare this solution, I need to understand how is that your solution implemented. So my question, I am now not, I can't compare if it's better to draw lines or not draw lines. I am just asking how to draw the one line if you have people with different opinions. So I wouldn't now compare if to draw line or not, draw line or not. I would just I first need to know how do you want to draw a line that everybody or almost everybody would agree on.
Okay, well, to do that, we need two things. We need a basic agreement on reality, and we need an agreement on the principle. Like, we just need to combine those two things. So, like, for example, if me and you both fully agree on the principle, and we both fully agree on reality, like what's happened or what is happening or what is true, then we shouldn't really have a conflict, because those two put together give you an answer that's relatively objective. Now, what I'm saying is,
we don't have the full agreement on the principle, and even we don't have it. Like, both of us, we don't have it, but there are much more people than just we. So how to do that?
I think we could have it enough, if you know what I mean. Like the way I kind of conceptualize it in my own mind is that we're lowering the resolution of, so say you've got your own idea of the non-aggression principle, and say you represent it as this circle that encompasses this and this, and then say I've got my own idea of the non-aggression principle and it's this circle, and our circles aren't completely aligned, but they overlap massively because they're obviously on the same principle, yes, and roughly the same idea of of thingy in that. And let's say that's true of lots of different, like say reasonable, what we would at least say is a reasonable conceptualization that differs in this slight way that you're talking about. What I'm saying is if you put all of those circles on top of each other, there's going to be all ways in which they deviate, but you're going to find this common circle within those circles
We were discussing
where they all overlap, where all reasonable people who understand basic reality and understand the principle can agree that beyond a reasonable doubt this is a violation of the non-aggression principle. This is black and white. Now we might also think that this is, but we can understand that there's like reasonable doubt. There is like we can understand that these other people that disagree with us and for whatever reason have a slightly different conceptualization. It's like, okay, that's for me, that's how we define gray area and separate it from black and white, is if we can peacefully accept and tolerate differing interpretations. But what I'm saying is there has to be a limit to what we will peacefully tolerate with regards to differing interpretations, because otherwise, if there's no limit, then the distinction itself is lost and then the concept's lost.
I feel a bit like déjà vu because it's really reminding me our last conversation, but I believe that in our last conversation we get into that there are some that you are having term reasonable doubt, but we don't even agreed on what is reasonable doubt. And if we, for example, talk about voluntary slavery, we are saying that it's not that it's violation of non-aggression principle. I'm saying that it's compliant with the non-aggression principle. And for me, this is quite very important question, because I feel the possibility to sell myself voluntarily to a slavery as a important part of self-ownership. And not that I would want to do that, but I feel it as a very important part of the self-ownership. You feel it different. So where do you want to draw the line? And there is much more. We were also talking about the intellectual property, and there are libertarians who are saying that the intellectual property is part of the non-aggression principle. I don't believe that, but there are such libertarians. Okay, and if you really want to apply that, what you said, where is the line? Then what would it mean? It would mean that whenever anybody see a grassland, we say okay, the line can't be here.
Sorry, repeat the question.
Well, how you have, let's say we would have thousands and thousands of people. Let's say that they would accept the non-aggression principle. And now you want to draw the line. If you would have there one person who would say that something is a grassland or gray area, you just move the line just for that one person?
No. It's not a case of, I mean, this isn't like a democracy. We have like let's say, for example, we've got these. We're trying to set we're doing this line, and me and you are having this disagreement about voluntary slavery. The first thing I'd say is, okay, well, we need to get into this now and see where our disagreement really is, because moving forward, my point is if we don't draw this line moving forward, violent conflict is inevitable, because if you've got your little community that's going to enforce your line in the sand, because don't forget what we're saying, this line in the sand is when we're not going to peacefully tolerate your differing interpretation. We're drawing this line in the sand, saying no, now we're say you're crossing over where it's black and white, and now we can use force to stop you, and all the rest of it. So if we don't draw that, if our lines are in different places, we're going to have violence against each other. If we can find a way to draw a line in the same place, then we can unite. Now, like with the example of voluntary slavery, I mean, I don't know if we still need to get more into the definitions, because obviously part of how, I mean, this comes a little bit into how we need to have the same conceptualization of reality, because it's like, what is the self? And like what you put to me before about like, okay, well, the problem is like, I can cut my hair off and sell it to you. I can give my organ and sell it to you. if I can do that while that's still attached to my body, then it's only a hop, skip, and a jump away from what's the difference between me just selling myself to you. My issue with that is I conceptualize it differently, that yourself, I mean, it's hard to draw a line where yourself is, but I think like if you cut your hair off, it's no longer part of yourself, you know, because it's just material that was once part of yourself, you know. And it's kind of like that with the organs thing. So it's different. It's difficult to sell your organs when they're still in your body in the way I conceptualize it. But I mean, these are very fringe cases that I could see, you know, these differences occur. Our conceptualization doesn't seem to be different to me in a way that I could imagine us, like, imagine this line that we're drawing. It's hard to see how that difference is so different that it's changing the fundamental line, if you know what I mean. It's almost like within the line, because and maybe I'm wrong, and correct me if you think I am wrong, but it feels like a lot of our disagreement is just different conceptualizations on the term self, and saying, okay, well,
maybe yes, but
yeah,
but I don't really want to get into these details because we were talking about them the last time. I'm still thinking about the main concept, and you say we have to do this, otherwise the violence is inevitable. But I think that the violence is inevitable. I think that you can't design society with no violence. I think that we can try to achieve something like little violence or little problems or little conflicts, but I don't think you can get rid of violent conflict.
Do you not think though that we can create a universal standard for when the violence is like legitimate or allowed?
I don't believe that this is possible. I don't believe that this is exactly possible. I think that we can create at maximum, at the best, something which is approximately approved by a lot of people with some distinctions. But I don't believe that it is possible to create principles which would be in a long time absolutely 100% accepted by really a lot of people. I think this is just not possible. And I have the problem that we are talking about if it's better to do it or not. But I don't think this is the question. I think the question is it possible? And I think the answer is no. And if you would tell me, if we would be talking here about if it's better to have a society where you can teleport yourself to any destination, or a society where this is not possible, I would absolutely agree with you that it's better to have the society when you can teleport yourself.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I don't think it's possible now, and I think this is the same problem with this universal non-aggression principle, which would be absolutely accepted by quite all the people, because I just don't believe. I think this is absolutely utopical. This is like a dream. It would be nice, and I'm not saying that it's not. It wouldn't be nice to do that, but I think it's not possible to do that.
I think. I mean, I don't think it's possible to get everybody to agree. I do agree with you on that, but I do think it's possible and necessary. Like, I come at it from two ways. I do disagree about. I do think it's possible, but I also think it's essential that we can create from this principle and from a shared understanding of reality, and a shared understanding of this principle. I think we can create a universal standard. And I mean, one example I often use, and it's not the best example because it wouldn't just come down to the numbers of age, but I often use age of consent as a good example of this because I can use numbers to represent what I'm talking about. But it wouldn't, obviously, it'd be mental competency and other things would obviously play a part. But let's just forget that for a minute and just talk about age of consent as a number. And let's just say I'm proposing we create a universal standard that has a black and white limit. So you've got like a limit of you can't a parent can't hold on to their guardianship of their child, which obviously involves a certain level of control over them, beyond a certain age, let's say 21, and let's say below 14 they can't declare them an adult and let go of them or whatever. But in that area between is a grey area. And what I'm saying is let's just say, for example, that's how we done it. What I'm saying is what we're saying is we might still disagree within the grey area, and I might not want to be a part of a society that has an consent of age as low as 16. I might want to only be part of one that's 18. So I can still exercise, my disagreement over that line, but I have to peacefully coexist with other societies. I can't wage war on them and all the rest of it. That would be considered aggression if I did, because I'm calling them violators because they've got a lower age of consent, as long as they're within this grey area thing that we've carved out. And what I'm saying is yes, we do have disagreements over, different people can say, well, when is a child an adult a child, and reasonable people can disagree. But what we can also do, we can also come together, and although we're never going to escape subjectivity 100%, we can come together and draw a line where we say, okay, we've got this grey area which we still disagree on, but we accept the peaceful tolerance of differing interpretations. But there's a line in the sand and there's a limit of tolerance where we say at this point we all agree that it's definitely a violation of the and it's not we all agree, sorry, that I misspoke, not we all agree, but what we're saying is those of us who have come together for this peace agreement have agreed that it's beyond a reasonable doubt. We're no longer tolerating this differing interpretation. Now we're saying you're violating it. Now we're saying we can use violence against you, and we're all, under this peace agreement that set this standard and drawn this line in the sand. So it's not about creating a standard that everyone will agree with. It's creating a standard that enough of us agree is beyond a reasonable doubt in accordance with this principle and a consensus of reality. Does that make sense?
A bit, but I don't think this is possible to achieve, because there will be a lot of reasonable people who would say that the line is, and I'm now not discussing the gray area. Now I'm discussing just the line between the desert and between the desert and between the gray area.
The black and white line. Yeah.
This line in the age since when the person is capable to, I don't know, contract, like sign a contract. There would be people who would say 12, there would be people who would say 15, there would be people who would say 10, but they all can be reasonable people, and you have a lot of opinions on where the line should lie. So if you just want to do the intersection of that, you would have to choose the lowest line. So then you in the end choose line like 4 years or something like that, because there would be some people who would agree with this opinion, and I for example, I personally agree that 4-year-old kid is able to agree with some types of contracts. Not all type of contracts, but sometimes some types of contracts. On the other hand, if you would ask, where is the age when a person can sign to all the type of contracts, I can say probably never, because there will be always people who will never be capable to understand all types of contract. So I think that you can agree with contract just if you understand, if you are capable to understand that contract. And if you have some person with IQ 70, he just he just don't understand contracts, so he is not capable to agree with that contract because they don't know what to do. So if you are finding a line where you can sign some contract, I can tell you that it will be almost like really 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. And if you are finding a line when you can sign all contracts, I can tell you never.
Yeah, but there's a great. I understand what you're saying, but there is a I mean, there's the gradation of competency, obviously, as you get older. But what I'm saying is there is, and I assume you agree with this, but there is a level of freedom that a consenting adult that we consider competent has, where they have the right to enter into, contract. I mean, like even you said that they could enter into any contract, like a free individual. So it's not about saying, okay, yeah, there are certain things that a child has the capacity and competency for, that is equal to an adult. What we're saying is that child a consenting adult, or a child, or a vulnerable child that doesn't have the full moral agency? It's not a part thing. It's like sorry to. But it's just want to make this point. For me, it's an all or nothing thing. Like, I don't understand, like in this country, for example, I don't understand how the age of consent for, I think, sex is 16, for alcohol is 18, for voting's a different thing, but like it's different for different things. For me, it's like you're a consenting adult, in which case you get to do all the things, or you're a vulnerable child, in which case you're under somebody else's care and they have to make decisions as your guardian, and you don't have that full autonomy, if you like.
For example, for me, this is absolutely not about age. I mean,
no, yeah, it's not.
So for example,
I just use that as an example for the numbers to illustrate.
Yes, but the point is that, for example, somebody can find a line between adult and kid, and I principally disagree with existence of such a line, because I don't think that there can be age line between adult and kid, because there is just no such thing. And you can have 12 years old who is already economically independent, and you can have 20 years old who is still guarded by parents. So this is another example of how it's hard to draw some line, because, for example, I would really strongly principially disagree with existence of such a line, because I don't think the point is to set some age. I think that this shall be I'm sorry, I don't know the word. Like, you should always take the individual case and find out if this person is already able to make the consent or not. So I quite don't believe that there would be some line, and there is a lot of people who say there have to be some line, but for me this is really a problem, because for me this is like you are taking freedom to somebody just because he's young, just because somebody who is older can't take the responsibility, and this is really not acceptable for my point of what freedom is, because I don't think you can take somebody's freedom because somebody else is not able to do something in that age.
No, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, no, I wasn't sort of. I fully take your point that it's not just about age. There's things like mental competency and all of that. The only reason I used age with regards to age of consent is just it was easier to illustrate, when we're talking about having a, and I could represent it with the numbers of age and that, like say nothing below this age, nothing above that kind of thing. But obviously there's going to be, people that are way above an age but don't have are no mentally different from a 6-year-old and still need the care and don't have the moral agency and all the rest of it. So I fully take that point, and I was just using the age as to help represent what we're doing with the lines. I mean, we wouldn't have a universal line just for age and no other considerations. It's still, like I say, it's about competency. It's about how we're defining that. But my point is, and the reason why I used age to represent it was just to sort of say, well, look, if we agree we've got this grey area here, like putting mental competency to one side, like, if we agree that we've got this grey area of, say, between, let's say, 12 to 21, and we say that what I'm saying is we can still disagree within that 12 to 21 period, even, like in my Nations of Sanity idea, under this peace agreement that let's say it sets it at 12 to 21, the mental competency thing would come in as well, and obviously, but let's just deal with the age for simplicity of discussion. What I'm saying is in this system, that 12 to 21 grey area, we could still disagree about that, and I might not want to have anything to do with somebody who's living in a society that allows it and all the rest of it, blah blah blah. But what I'm saying is I can't wage war on them within that grey area because that's deemed a grey area. But in the black and white, then, like, say for example, the parent who has abandoned their child to whatever, prostitution, let's say, that's like, you know, below that age, we can say that they have violated the non-aggression principle. We can say they have violated their duty of care because they still, oh, go on.
I just don't agree with this, because this is for me just too much simplicity to too complex world. And like you say, 12 to 21, okay, but this is still absolutely like, if you are trying to do something so universal, it should be also very long time persistent. But if you look just few hundred years ago, the people were adults in much younger age. So the problem is that you don't know what will be with the society in 100 years, 200 years. But like now, you are saying that all reasonable people will agree with beyond reasonable doubt that 12 years old is the youngest age. But just 500 years ago, in 12 years old, there were kings and they were leading armies somewhere. Well, I overdid it a bit, but not so much. The point is that the age, with this no reasonable doubt, definitely raised in last few hundred years. And this is the problem I have with it, because what I suggest is the polycentrical law, which is built from the bottom to the top. And in this case, the kids will be considered as kids by the current period. So if you would have the non-aggression principle in the society where it's normal that at 12 you can be the head of the family, you can wield guns, you can go to the army, you can kill people if you are 12, then it will be just different than in the society when you can't drink a beer unless you are 21, which is also kind of funny, because in some societies at 18 you can go and kill people, but you can't drink a beer after that. But the point is that in this free market law, polycentrical law, it can be adjusted by the social needs. This is what you are doing. I have the biggest problem with that there is no correction mechanism in a time. That if you now will say that the 12 years is the absolute border, you don't know what will happen with the society in 200 or 300 years, and in 200 or 300 years you can have adults since, I don't know, okay, 25, yeah, I get or since 10. I really don't know what will happen. And I think that if you want to design society like that, you have to have some correction mechanisms which would do like new lines. And this is what I propose with that.
But wouldn't that, sorry to interrupt, but I get your point, but wouldn't that correction mechanism, like, because it's like, I mean, I do take your point, and I agree what you're saying about, like, we can't just say a number and let that be the number for all time, because our conceptualization of reality might change to the point where we're like, actually, no, this person is, or, you know, our physiology might change, and, you know, there's all sorts of things, you know. I totally concede that. I mean, like I say, the numbers thing was just to illustrate my point about separating grey area from black and white. It doesn't have to be those numbers, and it doesn't have to, and it wouldn't be about numbers. It would be about other things. It would be competency and other things. But my point about it is I suppose the peace agreement wouldn't be that specific. It would be more about creating a universal consensus of reality, which I think we can do to a degree that we can work with. Like, you know, it's like, you know, like we it's, I mean, it's a bit like a court scenario. Like I think about like how can we determine someone's guilt? And if we agree beforehand, let's take as a presupposition that we've agreed on the principle that defines the crime as a crime, and we've agreed on the basic consensus of reality and the facts of the case and what have you. And then what we're basically saying is, okay, well, now we need to have this reasonable doubt, this beyond reasonable doubt. That's what I'm kind of saying is what we need to apply with this idea of having the non-aggression principle as law. So it's like, just like when you've got somebody who's murdered someone, let's say it's not something nice and easy and clear and all the rest of what I would call black and white. Like, you know, you've got someone who's murdered someone, definitely not allowed to do that. We consider them a criminal and all the rest of it. But we haven't proven, like, you know, we need to prove that they've done that. We know it's a crime and we know we've got all this evidence or whatever, but is there reasonable doubt and all the rest of it? And I'm saying, well, we should apply the same approach to the non-aggression principle itself if we're going to establish, as I obviously am proposing we do, if we're going to establish the non-aggression principle as the terms of peace, as a universal law, and if we're going to draw a line in the sand that creates a universal standard, we're going to need to have this, like, we're going to have to do it on a standard of what we're calling beyond reasonable doubt. I mean, it's not foolproof. It's still based on our conceptualization of reality. But what I'm saying is like with the child-adult point that you made, and I know you want to interject, but let me just make this. With the child-adult point, you say, okay, well, back in 20 years' time, we decide that the child-adult thing is different in a different place and all the rest of it, and our standards change. It's like, okay, well, our conceptualization of reality has changed. Okay, but this peace agreement can still apply because it's based on our conceptualization of reality and it's based on this principle. The principle staying the same, but our conceptualization of reality, as well as reality itself as it is as a matter of fact, you know, we understand that can be fluid underneath that. But you've always got that principle that you're putting over it, if that makes sense. Sorry, you wanted to come in.
No, I will put it a bit different. I don't believe that you can have this universal law without central authority. I believe that there are two ways. Either you don't have central authority, and then you don't have one universal law because the law is fluid in time and created from the bottom. Or you have the central authority and you have there something like universal law. And I don't see any chance how you can not have central authority but have the universal law, because there just won't be full 100% agreement on that law, and as they won't be the exact agreement, there can be some approximate agreement, and this approximate agreement can be solved like on the free market laws and so on. I wrote it in a book how I see that. But if we want to have really something like line in the sand, which is absolutely clear for quite anybody, I think this requires central authority, because let's say that you would have a line in the sand, and now you have there few companies who are enforcing law, and let's say that these companies just, even if they would first they agree on that one line that it's here, then in the time their point of views may change. They all might claim that they are still on the same line, but in the reality the line there will be few lines next to each other, and each of them would be claiming that this is the original line. And I think that as long as you have there no monopoly on the law, you always will have the polycentric law, in meaning like there will be few laws next to each other. They will be somehow compatible because it would be economically necessary that they can't be absolutely incompatible. But the society will evolve, and as the society will evolve, the law has evolved as well. And as the law will evolve, if you don't have central authority, the evolution will have to be done by many authorities, not one central one. And because there are many and not just one, they won't be doing it in exact same time. So this process of evolution would mean that you will have there few authorities, and they won't be absolutely agreeing on one exact law, but there would be some law which would be quite compatible, but not in some cases, and it would be shifting somewhere because the society needs to evolve the law, because you can't have one law which you just write once and it won't be changing.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I mean, the thing is, though, it's like, because, sorry, I had another point in my mind. I was thinking about those circles again, because the thing is, like you said, oh, well, we can have an approximate agreement. Like for example, if we take your way, for example, with regards to the building up through the market, would that be done with no constraints? I mean, can that openly violate the non-aggression principle? You know, because I suppose my vision of it is I'm not against the bottom-up growth thing that you're talking about, this like kind of natural market thing, but within the confines of the non-aggression principle only. Like, this is why I have the objection to like David Friedman's conceptualization, where things like drug laws and that are allowed to exist. I'm like, no, that can't be allowed. And this is why I feel like you need this universal peace agreement, this law that draws these lines in the sand and says, no, okay, this is all fair game sandbox stuff, and it includes grey areas and grassland, but here's the limits, you know, here's the lines. And the problem is if you don't have those lines, how do you even have the approximate agreement? Because if you have an approximate agreement, let's say, for example, in this anarcho-capitalist society that you're talking about, let's say I steal a car, you know I've stolen it, and I give it to you to sell. Are you going to buy that car, or are you going to know that that's not even my car to sell and that I'm a criminal? You know what I mean? Okay, well, what if somebody does buy it? Are we going to accept their ownership, or are we going to understand that, no, that's stolen goods? And do you know what I'm saying? What I'm saying is if we don't have this there, the problem is like, if you allow like some security to like enforce drug laws, for example, which for me are black and white, it's not even grey area stuff, but we can't say that it's black and white if we don't have a line that separates black and white from grey area.
Yes, but
and go on. Sorry.
Yes, it can happen. This can happen, and it's bad that it can happen. I agree with you. I don't like that, but the point is that there is no way how to prevent it, because this is like I don't know. It's like people who believe in democracy. They say the democracy have to protect the minorities, and I tell them no. If the majority will just vote that the minority won't be protected, it just won't be. And they say no, it's not possible. We somehow have to prevent it. And they say we can prevent it by the constitution. And I say okay, so if you have really big majority, you can even change the constitution. And the point is that I think that people who are designing societies are sometimes they trust in illusion that they can do something, something which is like preventing it from failure. But I think this is not possible. I think this is not possible. This is never possible. You can never design a society with a complete protection of some failure which you don't want. And I think that to be trying of this is just not possible. You just can't succeed. And I think you are absolutely right when you say that if I would have anarcho-capitalist society with this bottom from the top law, and there can be some deviations against the non-aggression principle, but I don't think there is a way how to achieve that this won't happen. I don't think that you can design a society in which there will be any law which won't be changed, because if you do whatever, then there can next generation and next generation and the next, and they just can't change the rules because they are there and you are already dead. So, you know.
But what I'm saying is, and I'm not asking you if you think it's a guarantee that this won't happen, but whether it maintains the definition of anarcho-capitalism. You said there can be deviations from the non-aggression principle, and it would still be called anarcho-capitalism in your mind with the deviations. What if there's outright violations? Is it still anarcho-capitalism? What if it's so outright violations it just looks like the world we have today, or even worse, like communist China or communist? So
it won't be called anarcho-capitalism in my mind.
Sorry, it won't be, no. But
No.
what I'm saying is there's a line that separates. Do you see what I'm saying? Like,
but the line is just good for if I would call it anarcho-capitalism, and I don't need such a line because I don't need definition in which I say this society is anarcho-capitalist and this not, because I don't think it's for anything good. I don't need definition of it, and because I don't need to be like, I'm saying I have some principles. I have non-aggression principle, and the closer is the society to the non-aggression principle, the better. But I personally don't need a point from which I will say this is anarcho-capitalist society and from which I will say it's not. I just can say the more of non-aggression principle, the better. And that's all.
Is there not a point though where you can say, all right, maybe because you still want to be able to have the reasonable disagreement with somebody else who also calls something slightly different anarcho-capitalism? But is there not a point where you can kind of say, okay, but there is a point where it's definitely not anarcho-capitalism? I know that you think, oh, well, it doesn't serve any purpose, but I suppose the point I'm trying to make is like, if you're saying to somebody, I think our society should be anarcho-capitalist, they might, okay, what's that? And then you're saying, okay, well, you need a definition. If you're going to tell someone we should do something this way, you need to give them a definition of what this way is.
Of the ideal, and I can say we can be as close to the ideal as possible. And if you would have its scale as like 0 is totality, absolutely the worst totality, and 100 is non-aggression principle fully, I say the closer to the 100, the better. I don't say, I never need to say we need the society which is 90 or higher. I don't need to say we need society which is 80 or higher. I say the closer to the 100, the better. Because, like...
When is it anarcho-capitalism to you, though?
What?
When would it be? What? I know you won't put a number on it, but roughly, like if it's 30%, if it's 30%, is it? You know what I mean? It's like,
I don't need to know this. It's for nothing good to me. Like, I don't care how it's called. I just care how much it's close to non-aggression principle. And anarcho-capitalism is just a word. I'm just using it as a mark of something which is close to that point. It's like in mathematics, you just say that something is the limit to something, and you don't care how close. It's just getting closer and closer, and it's called limit because it's getting closer to some point. Yeah. And I'm saying this is some ideal point. This is some non-aggression principle, and I believe that the closer the society is to this point is better. And I call this anarcho-capitalism, and I can say I call this anarcho-capitalism, and I can say, okay, whatever is near to this point, it's anarcho-capitalism for me, and whatever is far from this point, it's not anarcho-capitalism for me. And I don't need to say that from 80 it is anarcho-capitalism, because I can also say about some society, maybe it's kind of anarcho-capitalism, but it's just such a borderline, because I think that different freedoms are different important for some people. And for example, I feel probably as the worst oppression what we have here is the education system. This is, for me, this is the biggest problem. And just yesterday I was discussing with somebody on the social networks, and he said that basically for him it would be libertarian or anarcho-capitalist society if there would be no taxes. He is libertarian, and he said if there will be no taxes, basically this is what I want, and as there are no taxes, it's quite anarchic or libertarian for me. But for me, it's just not like that. For me, it's if I should say something like that, I would say basically the first is the free education system, and for me, the society where is the central education system and no taxes is more far from anarcho-capitalism than society where are taxes but absolutely free education. And this is purely subjective. So I absolutely don't see any point in setting some point from which this is anarcho-capitalism and this is not, because my definition, which is absolutely enough, is this is a scale. Here it's anarcho-capitalism, here it's not, and in between it's part.
Sure, but I mean, yeah, but you still need a definition, even if it's an approximate like I say, even if it's quite low resolution, you still need an approximate definition, like to distinguish. And like say we're in a statist society now, and we need to move towards an anarcho-capitalism. And you could say, okay, for me, if we get 90% there, that's close, or you don't put a number on it, that's fine. But my point is like, well, someone could say to you, well, we're already in an anarcho-capitalist society if their definition is allowed to stretch to
then I can say
status.
I want to be closer to that 100. I don't need to agree with him. If somebody is coming to me and say this what you are living is anarcho-capitalist society, I can say okay, but I need to be closer to the non-aggression principle. Because
right, okay. What I suppose what I'm saying is, and I need to be careful about how I'm explaining this, because like I suppose in a way I'm saying we need to be at 100, which I understand sounds a bit like ridiculous on the face of it. But when I say that, I don't mean like 100% of people agree or 100 like in that sense. I mean 100 as in violations of the non-aggression principle that we know are violations of the non-aggression principle with some kind of reasonable certainty, like, murder, rape, theft, assault, slavery, whatever you like, not voluntary slavery. All these things where us reasonable people, as we're going to self-proclaim ourselves, have a reasonable interpretation of reality. Say, like, this is definitely aggression and this is definitely self-defense. We can say I can have a point where we say that. And what I'm saying is I'm trying to get us to sort of fight for this universal terms where we're aiming for the 100, like even understanding that we've got slightly different interpretations and all the rest of it, but we're not allowing anything we know is a violation of the non-aggression principle. So like just your preference might be education and somebody else's preference might be like property rights, somebody else's preference might be freedom to use drugs, somebody else's preference might be taxation. What I'm saying is instead of us all fighting for our own individual things, if we got together and say, let's fight for the non-aggression principle, which covers all of these things, and to do that, we need to have some kind of universal version of it, some kind of, even if we lower the resolution to a point where we're kind of saying, okay, this is our, like what we're saying, the beyond a reasonable doubt standard or whatever. I know you don't think we can achieve that, but I mean, I do disagree. Obviously, I think we can achieve that because I feel like we kind of have to, like even for our market things, we have to have some kind of understanding of property rights for a market. Like free market is built on property rights. The different, like for example, if I build a factory and or pay other people to build it, and I'm doing it within property rights, and then a bunch of commies come along and try to take it from me, and then I hire my security services and all the rest of it. The society as a large can take a judgment on whether the commies are in the right or the person defending their factory is in the right by a universal understanding of what property rights even is. And we can do that. Like I feel like we can achieve that. I feel like we can, because we've got the principle itself. It's like when you're saying, oh, like I don't need to define anarcho-capitalism, I can just say we need to get closer to it. But I'm saying, well, to have one end, to have the whether you're talking anarcho-capitalism versus statism, or whether you're talking non-aggression principle versus like total violation of it, whichever way you're doing it, you still got to define your terms. Even if you're going to be very approximate, you need to define your terms to some degree.
we have some theoretical debate about if it's possible or not. I think it's not possible. You think it is. I think there is a way how to do that. Create it and get some agreement. At first, in current society, you definitely won't get agreement of majority, but doesn't matter. The point is, make that and do something, do the concept, write it down or whatever, and we can try if it's working or not on libertarians. Like, make the concept, and I don't say that you have to convince me, but let's say if you get 100 libertarians, convince 80 of them. If you do this, I can see how it's possible. I don't see any way how it is possible, but just because I don't see it, it doesn't mean it's not possible. But I think this debate is quite really theoretical, because I believe it's not possible, you believe it is. But I think the only way how we can find out is if you will try to do that. And if you are talking about lines in sense and black and white and so on. But if you write a concept, I know that you can't do it today or tomorrow, but take how many months you need and write a concept, and then we can try to, for example, in Czech Republic, we have a large libertarian group. I don't know if you have some group at your channel or whatever. You can come with the concept. I can even put it to our communication channels, and I can show it to libertarians here in Czech, and we can even try to let them vote. Like, is this what you would absolutely sign, like 100%, and you have no doubt to it? And I suppose it won't be working for the first iteration. I can imagine that there would be more iterations, but I strongly believe that this won't work. But if it will be even good for me. So if you can do something like that, I would be happy. And even if I don't trust, I don't believe that it will work. If you do it, and for example, if we two would agree on something, that would be great for me, and I maybe change my opinion, and I will see how it can be done, because it's possible that I'm overlooking something what I just can't see.
Well, I mean, I will do that, but just to the extent that I have already done it, would be this 3-part peace agreement, where I'm basically saying, okay, part 1 is saying that we define crime by the concept of individual self-ownership. So we're not saying it's not because this person has authority to say it. It's saying, so we're kind of saying, like, we're working it from that. So, like, say you had a constitution that says that you have to be governed by a democracy and it has to be 51% vote or whatever. It's like having that. So it is like a constitution in a way, but it's a constitution where it's just saying that crime has to be defined by the concept of individual self-ownership. So that's still going to be fluid in the sense of people's conceptualizations of reality.
I would agree with this.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's kind of what it is. I mean, I think I misspoke a bit when I was speaking with the numbers, because I was really just trying to illustrate the black area, grey area versus black and white concept. But what I'm really kind of doing with that is basically saying, look, because when people pose the question, well, what do you do about the grey areas? I say, well, if we agree that it's a grey area, then we should agree that we can't enforce it, because we should apply
I have absolutely no problem with it. This is something,
yeah.
Like, I absolutely get everything, and I agree with, like, what to do with the gray area, what to do with the white area, what to do with the black area. I absolutely agree with you. I have no problem with this. My only problem is that I don't think you can draw the line between the gray and black area. If you can draw the line, I want to see that, because it's really interesting. So if you prepare some document which would be drawing the line, I can even send it to our we have such a forum. We are discussing there, so I can send it there and I can ask the people what they think about it. So if you are and if they will be like agreeing with this,
when you say that we'll be drawing the line, just so I'm clarified on what you would want from this. So when you're saying that's actually drawing the line, what are you looking for exactly? Like that gives you a line for every scenario, or?
Well,
because the thing is
what will prevent. Sorry. It should be something what will prevent the society from any breaking of non-aggression principle. So the point is that not 100% people have to agree, but let's say at least majority of people have to agree that there is a line which is saying this is definitely against non-aggression principle, and the line should be enough for them. So they should be like really absolutely agreeing with this. They don't need to agree with what is definitely okay with non-aggression principle, but they should be absolutely agreeing with this is definitely against non-aggression principle, and they wouldn't want to add there something which is also definitely against.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, like for me, because, like I say, the basic agreement is just to say that the concept of individual self-ownership is how we define crime. So, and then applying this beyond reasonable doubt approach to the enforcement of it then comes from that. So it's kind of like saying, say you've got loads of cars all driving freely around the countryside. It's basically saying, oh, well, who determines the rules of this? You say, well, look, the only rule that is presupposed that we're saying that we're all agreeing on is that everybody owns their own car. So if you crash into me, you've aggressed. If I crash into you, I've aggressed, kind of thing. We can work that out from the fact that you own your car and I own mine, which gives you both right and responsibility. I mean, I think the real thing about it, I think the peace agreement's kind of simple, saying let's define crime by the concept of individual self-ownership. It's not defined by rulers, it's defined by that principle. That in itself is simple. The difficulty comes in our differing interpretations of reality and how we're applying it. So I just feel like we've only got the principle. That's the only thing that we've got that's kind of firm. Everything else is kind of a little bit fluid underneath that, but we hold on to that. So I'm trying to think of a scenario that would come up where you're like, okay, well, what would you do in this situation? If we use this governing idea that the concept of individual self-ownership is what defines crime and everyone has right over only themselves, then I think that things can be kind of deduced from that, you know. So like even the gray area stuff, like who has authority over the gray areas. Like I don't know if I made this point in our last conversation, but like with the age of consent thing, and again, not just coming down to numbers, but that idea was, okay, well, we can have our black and white universal standard where we'll step in and say this is definitely child abuse, or this is definitely child abandonment, or whatever, and this is definitely not, or now you're enslaving your child because they're not a child anymore, and all that. But what I'm saying is that grey area in between is the domain of the parents, because they have a duty of care, and it all comes back to self-ownership. It's not me just saying that, it's deduced from that concept. Like there's a lot of answers that we can
agree. I for example, this is another thing. I don't agree that the non-aggression principle means that the parents are obligated to care about their kid.
Oh, okay.
So this is the point that.
Could you give me your reasons for that?
Because I don't think it's always even possible, and I don't think the non-aggression principle should have there some, let's say, positive rights. I mean, it's not always possible for the parents to care about the kid. And you can't, and from my point of view, the non-aggression principle should be really just negative rights. And if you are just not able to do something, you shouldn't be violating the non-aggression principle. So,
okay, I think I understand what you're saying, but tell me what part of this you disagree with, because this is my argument for why the non-aggression principle does make parents responsible for their children. And I understand what you're saying about the positive rights thing, but for me, it's not. It seems like positive right, but it's come from the negative right, because if I pushed you into the water and you drowned, I'm responsible for you drowning because I pushed you into the water. Now, if you just drown, if I had no part of putting you in the water, I'm just walked by and you were drowning, I'm not responsible for you drowning. I don't have any positive obligation there.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I have the positive obligation if I'm the one who pushed you in the water is because I put you in peril. Now, the reason why I think this applies the same with a parent-child relationship is when I bring my child into this world, I'm bringing them into a world, into peril. So any harm that comes to them is my responsibility.
I know this argument, but I think that that this analogy is completely wrong. If you push me into the water, the problem is that you took me from somewhere where I was able to survive, and you put me somewhere where I'm not able to survive. So you changed my state from I am able to survive to the state I am not able to survive. But if you bring the kids to the world, you don't do this. You don't change its state from I am able to survive to the state I am not able to survive. You didn't do this. So I don't think that
I don't think that's a useful way to conceptualize it, because we can't really say with any certainty what state we brought them from, and because that invokes all sort of metaphysical beliefs and religious beliefs and all the rest of it. But what we can say is you've put them in peril, just like I put you in peril by pushing you in the water. Forget where you were already. I put the peril you're in now is my doing.
I think it's important where you were before. I think it's very important because if I am on the normal ground and you pushed me into the water, you broke my non-aggression principle. But if I am in some water and you are trying to rescue me and you are rescuing me, and during that you put me into another water where I die, you didn't do any aggression against me, because you didn't put me from a place where I was safe to a place where I wasn't. Like, I think that there is very important what was the previous state, because before you
but we can't determine the previous state in the case of the child. All we can determine is that it wasn't the peril that they're now in. Do you see what I mean? Like what I'm saying is like when I pushed you in the water, I put you in the water, and the consequences of you being in the water, for me, where you were previously doesn't seem super relevant. I know you're saying,
I think it's very relevant. I think it's very relevant because you are taking the. I showed the example.
If we put you from one water, if I took you out of the water and put you in some other water, I haven't committed a crime.
No, I need to figure out some example. Let's say, okay. Let's say that there is a. It's probably a bad example. Like, it's not so much realistic example, but I will say it, and maybe we will find something better. Let's say there is a house and the house is on fire. And let's say there is a yard and there is a wind from the house to the yard, and there is a lot of smoke in the yard. So you can die in the house because of the fire and on the yard because of smoke. If you are in the fire and I will go there for you, I will grab you and I will be trying to bring you outside. I bring you to the smoke and you die in the smoke. I don't think this is the violation of non-aggression principle. But if you are in the clean air next to the yard and next to the house, and I drag you from the clean air to the smoke and you die there, it is violation of non-aggression principle. So because of this example, I'm quite very sure that it's very much important from where you put from where and why you put the person to that, mainly from where and why, to that dangerous situation. And I think that on this example, I showed that it is possible that just say you put him into the water, it's not enough, because it's also relevant from where you push him into the water.
Okay, that's fair point, but for that to counter what I'm saying, wouldn't the parent need to know that they've taken them from like equal peril, if you like, or you know what I mean, or like the fact that we don't know where the parent's taken the child from to bring them into this world, the fact that we haven't got an answer for that kind of works in both ways, in the sense of, well, it also negates them saying, oh, well, I've brought them from a worse place, because they can't say that. They can't. All we know.
If you don't know, you should assume the. If you don't know, you should assume that. I'm sorry. The English.
Okay, let's put it this way then. Let's say we saw somebody throw someone into a burning building, right? But we don't know where they threw them from. Okay, are we saying that because of that we would have to assume that? I mean, I suppose I can see your point on it, as I even presented it myself, but because it creates that reasonable doubt over the guilt. But
yes, exactly. This is what I'm. By the way, today it's somehow harder for me to express myself. I don't know why, because the last time I could say anything I want. And today I already had many times when I wanted to say something and I didn't find the word. But this is what you say about the guilt. If you want to say that somebody is guilty, you have to see it beyond all reasonable doubt. And if somebody was dragging another person and the person died in the smoke of the fire, there, before you say that it's a murder and violation of non-aggression principle, before this, you must know that it wasn't the case of failed rescue.
Yeah.
So if we put this as equal, I believe that we can't say that the parents are.
It's still not an exact equivalent, though, because the person who could claim their innocence could at least make the claim, you know, even if we didn't see where they were rescuing them from or whatever, could at least say, oh no, I was rescuing them from this building. Like, the parent can't make that claim. For all they know, they were taking the child from some kind of blissful heaven.
They can make the claim, like I would make claim, and I feel it really like that. Like, I'm really happy that I get the chance to be in this world. And as I see it, and what would be my claim, it's better to be in this world at least for a while than not be here at all. So,
what, under any circumstances, even if you were born into slavery or some kind of torturous hell, you know, I don't think
maybe I would change my mind if it would happen. But as I see it now, I would say yes. If I can choose, if I will live my life as some slave or not at all, now I would say I would prefer the slavery. But as I said, maybe I would change my mind if it would really happen. You can't say it like that. But I think this is about different approach to it, and I think that the person can claim, like, I was dragging him from the fire and then he died in the smoke of the fire. And the parent can say the same as I did, like, I suppose it's better to give him life for some time, better than not give it at all.
Even if you abandon them to die, you know, it's like I think that's a hard sell. But I do get your point in what you're saying.
But the point with abandoning is that if you are, not in all cases you are physically able to take care of the child. Like, in our society, not so much, because our society is really rich, but there are a lot of cases when just the parent is just not able to take care of the child. And I think that if it's okay that really poor parent in Africa or India or wherever brings to the world few kids, and then just he can't give them food and they die. If this is not violating of the non-aggression principle, then basically this acting is not violating. And if it would be, then it would be violation even in the case that you just are not able to take care of the kid. Because this is
there's a difference with ability, though, isn't there? You know, like if you're if you're not able to you know, if you're unable, there's no kind of no one can represent the criminal intent of committing the the violation. Like, you know, it's like, you know, if I abandon my child, you know, like, or neglect them in some kind of way, that's not the same as not being able to, you know, like someone who's doing their absolute best, you know. So sorry.
Being able in for what price? Like, I mean, you. Like, what does it mean that you are not able? It's like it's not just yes or no. You can be able, but in the price you don't want to or can't pay, and this is quite subjective, because is the parent obligated to die for his kid? And if not, why he should be obligated to do something less?
Yeah, I mean, like, I put it back to that. I mean, it's interesting to get different perceptions on this, but I like to answer that question. I bring it back to what I already said about putting them in peril. That's why you're, like the pushing the person in the water thing. Now, I know obviously your objection to that is, yeah, but the difference with the water example is, you know, that you push them from a safe place to an unsafe place, so you can say for certain, beyond reasonable doubt, that you've made that act of aggression. I suppose my conceptualization that came out from a different angle with the parent thing, because when people come to me, because sometimes I've had like smart asses come to me and say, well, don't all, like, when they're trying to pick holes in the non-aggression principle, they'll often say, well, aren't parents violating the non-aggression principle by having kids, because they're doing it without consent of the kids they're bringing them into this world?
I don't think this, yes.
And well, my rebuttal to that is, I say, yes, but they can use implicit consent, like where you mentioned about, I know that I want to be in this world, and I use the example of, like, if you push someone out of the way of an oncoming bus, pushing someone normally is not valid, and you don't have time to get their consent, but you've got what we would call implicit consent, where, like, it's reasonable to assume that they want you to do that, but they just don't have time to give you the consent. They're unable to give you the consent. And it's a similar thing with the child thing. I say, well, we can invoke implicit consent to bring children into the world, because it's reasonable to assume that they would want to be brought into existence rather than not. But that implicit consent is conditional on a certain quality of life and a certain duty of care. If we bring them into this world and abandon them, I think we fail to meet the criteria of the implicit consent.
I absolutely don't agree with this. I think that implicit consent, like, if you are argumenting by that you don't know from where you are taking the child, you absolutely can't say this about the implicit consent, because what if you absolutely don't know if you are taking the child from somewhere and how is it there like? Let's say if you would assume that you are taking the kid from the worst hell you can imagine, then even really poor life with really soon death should be good. And if you are taking him from some great bliss heaven, then even the taking him here and caring here for him can't be take as implicit consent. So I think that this argument with implicit consent is just not valid at all, because you can count that you have implicit consent of the kid to be brought here to this world, but you definitely absolutely can't put there any condition about the quality of life, because this would be absolutely depending on from where you are bringing him. Like, if you are, it's the same like with the person and the fire, smoke, and clean air. If you have the person in the burning house, you have his implicit consent to drag him to the smoked yard. But if you have there in the clean air, you absolutely don't have his implicit consent to drag him to the to there. So if you don't know from where you are taking him, I think you can't say this at all.
Well, I think if you don't know where you're taking them from, the fact that we can't answer that question, I think just makes it neutral. So like, if you bring someone into a good situation, you brought them into a good situation. If you bring them into peril, you brought them into peril. And the fact that we don't know where you brought them from means that it doesn't change. You know, if we did know, like say we suddenly found out that you actually come from this hell thing, then we could certainly use implicit consent, and the the standard for a life worth living versus that might be much lower if we all of a sudden knew that. And if we were taking them from some kind of heaven, I understand what you're saying. It's like, okay, well then the implicit consent would have a totally different standard as to whether it would apply. And I'm saying, okay, well we don't know. To the best of our knowledge, everybody who's alive, unless they're living under suffering conditions. I mean, we do have a kind of, you know, we do make determinations, you know, like when we put our pets down and stuff, and even the argument for like euthanasia and stuff, you know. Or obviously we don't usually use implicit consent with humans because they can express their own consent, but with young children and with animals and all the rest of it, we would use implicit consent, you know. So, or maybe we would, you know, we certainly do it with animals now. I know euthanasia with humans is a bit more of a controversial subject, but again, it's certainly one that I think self-ownership answers relatively objectively by saying, you know, that we have right over ourselves, including the right to die.
Well, I think that the problem is that you are counting with something like good and bad situation. And I think that in the global scale, there is nothing like good or bad situation, because the good or bad situation is always compared to something. So like bringing person to good situation or bringing person to bad situation is nonsense unless we are saying compared to what.
Well, actually, no, come on. I would push back on that, because think about it for a moment. Can we not make determinations that somebody is suffering enough that we would invoke implicit consent to put them out of their misery? Like, say someone was just like they weren't able to give explicit consent themselves.
But it's just if you see his misery and then you see the next situation. But if you don't see the starting point, you never can say this. This is what I'm saying. You can't say good or bad situation if you don't have the comparison to any other situation. Because
what about
what you are basically saying is that if you bring the kid here and then it will die in age of 1 year, it's like bad. But if you bring the kid here and it will die in age of 90, it's quite okay. But the problem is that the only thing which you are comparing it is the constant of average human life length, and the problem is that or average human life quality in this world. But you absolutely don't know anything about if you are taking him from somewhere. You don't know, like you can't. If we are talking about things like bringing kids to the world, and we are talking about quality of the life or length of the life, you absolutely can't compare this with anything of human suffering or human well-being or human length of life.
But let's take it from the other side, though. What I'm saying is, say you've got somebody towards the end of, like, you know, like say you've got somebody where you're making a decision whether it would be humane to end their life. Say they're
once more, please.
Say, you know, like the euthanasia argument, like you're making a decision whether it will be humane to end someone's life. Say somebody's suffering, or like we do with our animals when we put them down if they're too ill and they're suffering, and we say, you know, when we make that decision, we're making that decision. Now, what I'm saying is we're making that decision with implicit consent. If we can't get their actual consent, we would use implicit consent. We would say, okay, it's reasonable to assume that death would be preferable to the suffering that they're going through right now. Now, what I'm saying is we can do that even though we don't know where we're sending them when we kill them. For all we know, we could be sending them to a hell that's infinitely worse than the suffering they're going through right now. For all, you know, using that same argument of, well, for all we know, the child we've taken from could be taken from some heaven, you know, or hell or whatever. You know, it works the same the other end, but we still we still can do that. I mean, I mean, would you say we couldn't do that? Would you say we couldn't use implicit consent to end someone's life if we thought they were suffering?
The point with implicit consent is that it can be revoked with explicit.
I agree. Yeah, I agree about that.
Yeah. And then if you kill somebody with like implicit consent, it quite can't. But I would be very careful with this. If you kill animal which is not owned by anybody, you are not violating the non-aggression principle. So this is.
Well, let's assume animals are. I mean, I was using animals as an example. Well, let's go for children then.
If you kill person, I think if you weren't asked about that, you did violate non-aggression principle, even if you did it because the person suffered. And I believe that it's really like that. Like.
So just to clarify, are you saying that we can't use implicit consent for euthanasia?
I don't think. I think we can, but it's violating of non-aggression principle.
Oh, okay. That's an unexpected answer.
Like it's again because for this I have a bit different point of view than other people, because usually I see that if people are going through some real bad suffering, they are usually pointing on that event in their life, like that was terrible. I don't have it like that, because usually when I go through some real suffering, and I don't think I'm saying it because I don't know what is pain or like that. Like the last summer, I almost died. I broke my body really terribly. I broke my spine and like 25 bones, and they were even out of my body. And I consider this as a very good experience in my life, which gave me a lot. And anytime when something bad happened to me, I got quite a lot of injuries during my life. I always considered this as something good which happened to me because I learned something. So I, of course, can't imagine any possible pain I can go through. I can imagine a lot of types of pain, but I can't imagine everything. So there can be some pain which I would not consider like it was good for me. But for example, for me, the euthanasia is not a good solution, as I can say now. It's of course possible that I would be in some situation where I would be begging for the death, maybe, but I don't believe that I would want it really. I mean, like, if somebody would tell me now, you have last month of your life, and you would just suffer for all that month. Do you want to rather die or die after that month of pain? Now, I would say I want to go through that month of pain and then die, even if maybe after the first day I would regret this decision. But if somebody would ask me now if I want to die now or be months in pain and then die, I would choose the other option. But and because I see it personally like that, I have some problem with this implicit agreement on euthanasia or something like or this stuff, because I wouldn't give that implicit consent, and I would be revoking it. Maybe not in that situation. I can't say, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. So what would you say? Because obviously I use implicit consent to the person who's picking holes in the non-aggression principle to say, well, aren't the parents violating the non-aggression principle by having a child? What would you say to that then, if not using implicit consent?
I don't think that for having a child you need implicit consent of the child because the child is not existing in that time, so you can't have any consent. Like this, I was talking with you about the implicit consent because it was your theory, but I wouldn't absolutely use the implicit consent as an argument because I don't think there is that implicit consent because the child is not there in the time. I would say that I have my body. I can do whatever I want with my body, and if I am doing consensual sex, it's just decision of me and the other person. And if it means that there would be some person created after that, the person couldn't give any type of consent because it didn't exist back then. But it doesn't mean that I didn't have the right to do something with my body, because I think that the negative right means that I can't harm existing person, but I didn't harm existing person. So while I have that sex, the person wasn't existing. So I didn't violate any property rights of anybody because there's no existing person who could be even somehow violated. And then in that time when the person can say, okay, this was violating non-aggression principle against me, I believe that in the time of that act, there was no me, so it couldn't be violated.
Right, okay. But if you believe that, then doesn't that take away your ability to dispute the putting them in peril thing? Because you don't have any assertions that you've taken them from a worse place. You know, like I said about that whole.
I don't think I take the kid from the worst place. I think I took the kid from no place. I think I created the kid.
Yeah.
But the alternative to be created is just not to be created. But not to be created can be better or worse, just depending on if the person who came to the life would prefer the existence of or non-existence. But we don't know that. But in the moment of the creation of that person, the person wasn't existing, so there couldn't be violated any rights of that person because the person didn't exist.
Okay, but then as soon as they come into existence, then I assume their rights can be violated. Would that not be true?
But not by abandon, because there's no obligation. And now, I mean, just by non-aggression principle, if somebody would like cut this video and they say there's no obligation of the parent to care of the kid, I of course don't think that like by.
But just according to the non-aggression principle.
Yeah, just if we are talking just about the non-aggression principle, I think there is no obligation of the parent to take care of the kids, because I think that there is no obligation of any parent to take care of any person to take care of any other person. And I don't think that when the parents created the kids, I don't think that there is the contract that they could bring him here, because there was no subject to which they can make the contract. And this means that they have no obligation by non-aggression principle to care of him, of the kid.
Okay, I understand your argument. I mean, I do disagree with it, but obviously, for the sake of anyone listening, to clarify, I understand that you're not advocating for child abandonment. You're just pointing out that the non-aggression principle doesn't.
I think there's a lot of things we shouldn't do. Like we shouldn't. Well, there's a lot of things I consider as bad things, but they are absolutely okay with non-aggression principle. I don't think that the non-aggression principle is the line between good and bad. I think there's a lot of bad things which are not violating the non-aggression principle. So I think that child abandon is one of the bad things which are not violating the non-aggression principle. And I see it similarly as like you are going on the street and you see there some person bleeding and lying and dying. If you just ignore it, you didn't break the non-aggression principle, but it's not so good acting. So I feel the kid abandon similar as just not help to somebody who is dying.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I don't agree with that, but I will think more on your arguments because I haven't come across those specific arguments. In fact, I'm surprised there wasn't an area I was expecting pushback on. I was expecting full agreement that parents had, and like I say, I understand that you're not advocating that parents should abandon their children, but I don't think they have the right to under self-ownership. I do still think that they have a duty of care. Like I say, like with my child, I brought him here. I do still conceptualize it. I understand your argument against it, but I do still think even if you don't know where they've come from, for me that just makes it neutral. But what's not neutral is what I'm bringing them into, regardless of where I brought them from. Sorry, go on.
But by the way, from what you think, I think that the implication of it is that the parent has to sacrifice his life for the kid to some point, because, like, let's say that if it's really true what you are saying, like if I would argue, I'm sorry, I'm really bad in the expressions today. I don't know why, but now it's somehow worse. But if I agree that the parent is by the non-aggression principle obligated to care for the kid and somehow ensure his life, there shouldn't be logically something like at some cost, because the non-aggression principle is not saying that you are obligated to sacrifice your luxury or your or something like that to care for that kid, but you don't need to sacrifice your life. I think that it's just you are obligated or you are not obligated if you are able. So according to this, it would mean that the parent have to sacrifice his life for the kid, because if he is obligated to sacrifice his luxury or something like that, or some free time, or sacrifice this stuff to help the kid, I suppose he should be also obligated to sacrifice his life.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it depends how you define sacrifice your life, but yeah, I mean, I suppose the way I conceptualize it again is a little bit different, but more that you're responsible for what happens to them. Like, so, you know, like if I push you in the water, I'm responsible if you drown. If you don't drown, you manage to swim, but your clothes are all wet, then I'm responsible for the damage to your clothes, or whatever. You know, I'm just responsible for the consequences because I done the initial act that put you in that peril. Yes. And I just think the same applies with the parents. So it's not that, you know, so basically, if my child starves to death, then I'm responsible for that because I'm responsible for their care, because I brought them into this world where they can't feed themselves. And like I say, the way I conceptualize it is that duty of care continues until the child is no longer a vulnerable child and becomes a consenting adult, in which case they take full responsibility for themselves. And, you know, and I mean, I understand what you're saying. I suppose the way I conceptualize it, though, it doesn't violate the no positive rights rule, because I don't conceptualize it as a positive right, because it's not a positive obligation. Like, I don't have to care for anybody else's children. Like, I don't have to rescue anybody else from the water. I only have to rescue the person that I pushed in the water, and I only have to.
If I bring kids to this world, and in this world where I bring him is something which is threatening the kid on his life, and I see it, and I can sacrifice my life to stop this threat, I am obligated to do it.
I would hesitate to say that. I would just say that you would be responsible for what happened to them. So if they lost their lives, then you would be responsible in some way for that, because you know, through your inactions. I suppose, yeah. I'm trying to think of an exact scenario so I can kind of work it out in my head.
If I let him starve, it's one thing. But let's say that the kid is on the rails and train is coming, and the only way how I can get him out of the rails is that I come there and push him away, and I die there, and the train kill me. According to this, as a parent, I'm obligated to do this, because it's my fault that the kid came to that rails. But it should be even wider. If I am in a house and there is let's say coming some thief or some aggressor who's breaking in, and I know that he's going to kill all of us, I am also obligated to fight him to my death because it can help to the child. Because I bring the child to the world, I bring the child to this home, and the child can't defend himself, and somebody is breaking in, and I am obligated to take care.
But that's I mean, this is why I think where this grey area, black and white distinction comes into, because the thing is that's involving a lot of things that can't be predicted. But like, you know, I mean, just to come back a bit, just to rewind, because you said, oh, well, if you let them starve, that's one thing, but let's move on to these more complicated scenarios. And my point would be, well, no, let's go back to the easy one, because if the parent has no obligation, we should be able to deal with the easy one just as well. If the parent, like what I'm saying is, if the parent has no obligation, then let's deal with letting them starve. You know, I'm saying that they have that obligation because they brought the child into the world. They can't just let them starve to death. They know, you know, these other scenarios, these are other like unforeseen dangers that have come in. They're not part of the it doesn't meet that black and white standard of like putting them in peril and letting them face the obvious consequences of that. You know, if I push you in the water and you drown, that's a consequence that I've put you in that peril, and those are your things. If I push you in the water and as I'm rescuing you, somebody shot you in the head, I didn't shoot you in the head.
Yes,
do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, okay, but
I'm not responsible for protecting you from being shot in the head, you know, because that's a totally different thing from the peril I put you in.
Okay, but if I bring the kid to the world and let's say the kid will have some bad heart, and I am obligated to give him my heart because nobody else interfere, but I'm obligated to keep him alive. Because the point.
Well, no, again, because the thing is like if I bring a child into this world, I'm bring and I let them starve to death. That's like the reason why I equate that to pushing someone in the water and letting them drown. Is that's a foreseeable consequence of the peril I put them in. You know, if I bring a child into this world and then just don't feed it, I've brought it into peril and let that peril kill it. You know, like I've let that foreseeable consequences happen. Now, if I can't predict that the child will have a faulty heart, for example.
But should violating or non-violating non-aggression principle depends on what I should predict or not? Because I think it depends on what happened and not what I predicted.
Well, but it's like, you know, if I put you in, like I say, if I put you in peril of pushing you in the water and you drown, then your injury is a direct result of the peril I put you in. But if somebody else came along and shot you while you're in the water,
but the injury of the heart is also the result of bringing the kids to this world. Like you are comparing.
It's not foreseeable though, is it? It's not. Like you have no way of knowing that, you know.
If I push somebody somewhere where he dies and I didn't know, it's still my fault because I pushed.
Yeah, although not to the same degree. I mean, we wouldn't accuse you of murder if we knew that you didn't knowingly put someone in, you know what I mean, into a you know, like, you know, if you thought you were, I can't think of a scenario, but you know, if you thought you were pushing to someone onto a sofa and you actually pushed them into a fire or something by mistake, or I suppose a little bit like the Alec Baldwin scenario. I'm sure you heard about that famous actor Alec Baldwin who shot somebody.
I know that he shot somebody.
Yeah, did you not hear about that? That happened.
I just know the actor, but I don't know that he shot somebody.
Yeah. I mean, it happened in the last year, even like the last couple of months, maybe a few months ago. On set, he killed somebody by shooting them with, I don't know the details of it. Obviously, it was an accident. You know, he didn't know I think he didn't realize he had a live gun, some kind of error on set, and he shot and killed some woman. I don't know the details of who the person is, but like I think she was like a stuntwoman coordinator or something like that. Yeah, and obviously the question of well, maybe some people are saying he's guilty of murder, but generally speaking, people aren't accusing him of murder. You know, it's generally considered to be a terrible accident. Now, there is obviously questions about criminal negligence, and obviously investigations are being made as to whether, you know, and all of that sort of stuff. But that's an example of somebody doing something that they didn't realize would, you know, like an accidental thing. And it's like, well, then the criminality of what you've done when it's an accident is it's brought into question, at least, you know. It's different from an intentional act, you know, something like, you know, when you talk about parents that aren't able to feed their children.
It is definitely different if you do something intentionally or not intentionally. But I think that the principle, non-aggression principle, is neutral to this. I think that if you do some action intentionally or non-intentionally, like you do some action and it can violate or non-violate non-aggression, violate or non-violate non-aggression principle, but it doesn't matter on if it was intentional or not. We can then, like, the non-aggression principle itself doesn't contain punishments. So definitely, if it was intentional or not, we can then talk about punishments, for example. And if it's intentional, we can punish more than if it.
But if I like say for example, I'm not looking where I'm going, I walk into somebody, is that assault?
If you walk into somebody,
yeah, by mistake, like I'm walking down.
Yes, I believe that it is a violation of non-aggression principle, but you have a lot of violations of non-aggression principle, and they can have some hard consequences or some soft consequences.
Like difference in severity, like.
Yes, and I think that one thing is if it was or wasn't violating of non-aggression principle, and the other thing is if it was violating, what exactly happened, what damage was done, and then and if it was on purpose or if it wasn't, and so on. But I think that the first question, if it was or wasn't violating of non-aggression principle, is absolutely independent on if it was on purpose, what was the damage, and so on. So because if you accidentally hit somebody by a car, you definitely violate non-aggression principle. And if you accidentally walk into somebody, it's the same, just with much
lower severity.
Yeah. So the thing I want to say is, yes, it's different if you starve your kid to death or if you don't give him your heart to make him survive. But basically, in both cases, if you violate non-aggression principle by one of the things, I suppose you violate it even by the other action, because I don't see why it shouldn't be, because, like, of course that you can be almost sure that the kid needs to eat, but for example there can be some situation in somebody else would feed him, and you can be almost sure that the kid will have healthy heart, but you can't say it for sure. You have to somehow count with the possibility that the kid will have faulty heart. So I suppose that according to this, if we accept that abandoned kid is violating of non-aggression principle, I suppose that the implication of it is that not giving him your heart is also violating, even if we can say that there are other circumstances, it's just not so hard violate you know what I mean? Like
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. It's like different severity. Yeah, and sure, it's like taking a penny from a millionaire or something,
yes,
as opposed to
yes,
the
exactly.
life savings of
Yes.
a poor person. Yeah, yeah. No, I understand what you're saying. I'm not 100% sure I agree with all aspects of it. But I think I'm pretty sure I understand the point. I suppose, yeah, there's a lot to consider there. I mean, the problem is like, because it's like, I suppose where I'm looking at it is with the non-aggression principle defining crime, and like when it comes to like say like I mean, I suppose it's hard for you to agree with this because you don't agree that parents have that duty of care over their children according to the non-aggression principle, not according to your own morals, obviously. Obviously, because where I do, but I'm like, you know, it's like if my, so I'm just trying to think of an example, but I'm trying to use one that you would agree with and not one that you wouldn't. So like the parent one, I'm sure, because obviously, like from my point of view, it's like I think I do have that duty of care over my child. So like I'm responsible if I've done anything intentionally to harm them, but also if I allowed them to come to harm through criminal neglect, but not if it was some kind of out of my power, unforeseeable, you know, event. I suppose it's a little bit similar with, I suppose you could do the same thing with other kind of assaults on people. Trying to think of an example that I can give. I wonder whether some of this stuff might be worth ruminating and talking another time, you know?
Maybe we can do that. We can, let's say, pause this topic and we can come back to it the next time we can call. Like, because the point is that I really love these conversations and discussions because it's really interesting for me. But I don't know if this is my normal state or if the last time it was somehow better. But this day, my English is much worse than the last time because the last time I really could say anything I wanted, and now I very often can't. So, and I think it's worse and worse as the time is going because I am more and more tired because we just quite late hour for this call. I would go to the second topic of the book. You said that you have there two pushbacks. We discussed one. I would discuss the other one. So we would close the pushbacks on the book, and the next time we can, for example, continue in this.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I mean, I will say, in your defence, with regards to the communication, English is my first language, and I'm struggling to find the words. And I think that's because we're getting into very like minutia. You know, I don't know if you know that word minutia, but we're getting into those kind of, and I think it's gets harder. You know, we're not dealing with easy, simple stuff. We're getting into the kind of the real kind of fuzzy edges and stuff, and trying to. And I think that, like I say, I'm struggling to find the words, and English is my first language.
Because I'm exactly finding the words in Czech, but sometimes I don't know the translation. And this is something what in our last conversation, this never happened to me. And this time, like I needed 10 words I didn't know in English. So I suppose it's because I'm really tired. And today I had a hard day, and it will be midnight already, and it's quite late. So I think I'm not in my best condition. I'm not sure.
Well, it's still been a very interesting conversation for me, but we can wrap it up now and put a pin in it.
I would like to hear the second pushback, and then you can.
The second pushback, I'm trying to think. Well, I think I already went through it, didn't I?
Great.
So, well, I mean, because my two pushbacks one was the land ownership thing, which we kind of already spoke about, and the other one was the idea of this, basically this, and which the bit that tied to my whole Nations of Sanity thing about the need to draw the line, this idea of this kind of self-regulating market. That was the other pushback, like this idea that we can kind of not have those lines. That was my other pushback. That's why I connected it to my own project, because it connects to why I feel like
it was just one. I understood that this was the first one, and I was expecting other one. So you read the book, and this is your two pushbacks to it, and the other content of the book you agree with.
I'm pretty sure. I mean, I'll have a when I'm thinking about all these other things that we've spoken about. There might be something I thought, oh, I should have forgot to mention that. But no, I mean, because like I say, I agree. We are on the same page with most things, and if we have a surface level conversation and don't get into the details, we probably wouldn't even find any areas of disagreement. It's only when we get into the more detailed examination that, and like I say, when I read your book, like I say, most of it, it's like, I agree with most of it. The arguments I make myself, a lot of them, you know what I mean? So a lot of it was stuff I've even said myself, which made it easier to translate because I knew what you were trying to say, on some of the words and stuff. So, like I say, the only 2 points that I can specifically remember thinking, oh, I got a bit of pushback there, was one was the issue of land ownership and making the point that there's a lot of invalid land ownership claims and there's a need to tie property ownership and the right and getting that property rights. And then the other thing was this idea, as much as I have respect for the free market functioning, I do still insist that it needs to actually be a free market, like a truly free market in a truly free society. And for that to be the case, we need to have some kind of terms under which we operate. And that's where my whole idea of having this peace agreement comes into mind, and some lines in the sand where we say, okay, we'll let people disagree on the fuzzy edges, but we need to have a limit. We need to have a line. We need to preserve the distinction, is basically that. Those are my 2 areas of pushback, and obviously we've gone through a fair bit of detail on them already. But yeah, those are the only 2. I mean, I will, if I can think of others, I will obviously get back to you in that, and I hope to have another conversation with you because I do enjoy these and that. So we can obviously, but those are the 2 main points. One was the land ownership thing and just making that clarification between invalid, like enclosures and all of that. And then the other thing was, like I say, and that's the one bit where we're still in disagreement, because I still think we need that line, because as much as I love the free market arguments, I think they depend on it actually being a free market. And as soon as you let the non-aggression principle be violated, it undermines a lot of the qualities that the free market has. A lot of the arguments for the free market depend on that voluntary.
I agree. I absolutely agree with you in that. But I think that, and I also agree that it would be nice to have such a line, but I don't think it's possible. But I think that the free market can maintain itself, sometimes better, sometimes worse. And of course, it can happen that you would have free market and then it wouldn't be able to maintain itself, so it would fall into some regulated market. It can happen. And I think this can't be prevented anyhow, this possibility. I think we should try to have as free market as possible. And then the market itself has some ability to protect itself from being regulated. But this ability is not 100%, as well as no system can be, no system can have the ability to maintain itself forever with no exception and with no fail. Like anyhow, any society order will fail one day. Like if you have democracy, if you have feudalism, if you have anarcho-capitalism, if you have voluntarism, if you have whatever you have, it just will fail one day, because there is no configuration of society which is able to hold itself forever. So definitely everything fails sooner or later, and it means that even free market can't protect itself forever for anything. So even if we will have some anarcho-capitalism and some real free market, one day this free market won't be free anymore and it will be regulated. And I think that we can leave at the free market to maintain and protect itself. And these lines, in the sense, for me, they are nice. And I think they are mainly good for that we can point on, this is not anarcho-capitalism anymore, but I don't think this is so much needed, because I don't think you need to say now it's not anarcho-capitalism, because anyway, if the society would be not anarcho-capitalism but just closely not, it's significantly better than if it would be complete totalitarian society. So I suppose that this is really, that it's not so important to be able to say this is or this is not anarcho-capitalism, because we can always say just be freer, and anytime we can be more free, because in any society you will never have 100% freedom. So always we can point out, like, yes, go by the direction of more freedom, and we can say this in absolutely totalitarian society, and also in very much free society we can also just point on be more free. This is
No, I accept that, and to be honest, I do agree with that to a certain extent. I suppose I still feel like we can and must still be able to define freedom, even if we accept that we can't get 100% there. You know, like it's been said to me that, you know, perfection can be the enemy of progress, and I've been accused of being a bit too perfectionist with what I'm trying to achieve with regards to, you know, this. But it's like I say, I do appreciate that we live in the murky world of the real world, where it's not going to have that perfection of everyone agreeing and all of that. But I just feel like we should still be able to get like like you know, like I say, use the principle. We should still be able to use the principle as that guiding foundation, and combine it and
I
define.
agree with this on
Sorry.
individual level. So I'm sorry that I interrupted. I agree with this absolutely on individual level. I think that it's very important for every individual that he knows what he wants, what is the freedom according to him. And I think that it's very important that, because when a person can't specify what he wants, it can be always like, I feel like this, I feel like that, and it's changing by what just happened. I think that the principles are really important. So it's very important to have a principle, and I think it's very important for individual and for his consistency to know what he wants. And I see we both very much think about non-aggression principle, and you have your interpretation, I have my interpretation, and I think this is very important. But I think that you can't unite them without excluding some people or some opinions from this process. And I don't think that anybody except of the free market law can somehow correctly choose what people you should exclude from this process, because you have some ideas about non-aggression principle, I have some other ideas, other people have some ideas, and I think there can be no arbiter who can say you are excluded from the process of uniting those ideas.
That's true. We can do that, but we can, like, not all arguments are equal. You know, you might get someone in there trying to tell us that rape is allowed under the non-aggression principle, and maybe you get 1 million people trying to present that argument, and there's only 10 of us up presenting the opposite argument, but we will still fight for what we consider a for sure violation. You know what I mean? You know, for that interpretation, because we're certain in that area. Where I suppose that's why I kind of feel like we need to kind of separate. I know it's difficult to have a presupposed line that we can all agree on, but this idea of saying, well, look, you know, there's a difference between these grey areas where we can agree to disagree, and then these areas where it's like, no, you're definitely violating the non-aggression principle, and I personally, whether it's me or everybody else who thinks like me, will fight you over it. You know what I mean? That's why I call it the terms of peace. You know, it's like, you know, if I see somebody, use an extreme example, but you know, if I saw someone trying to rape somebody, I will use my own force, and you know, and everybody around me, and anyone who tries to tell me that person's got the right, I will fight them as well. You know what I mean? It's like, that's what we're saying about these terms of peace and drawing this line. It's like, I say, well, this is when we'll fight you over it, and the other time we might still disagree, but because we're accepting that there's some level of reasonable doubt, even if we don't personally agree with that standard, but we agree that it's at least we're basically going to say, well, we'll let you live in peace.
I absolutely agree on the individual level. Like it's important to realize that you don't like something what somebody is doing, but you won't initiate force because it's right to do that.
But there is a line when you can use force. You know, there is a line.
Yes, but I believe that the line is different for an individual. Like I don't think there is some objective line. I think that this line is subjective for anybody because anybody would use force when he thinks it's legitimate. It's good.
I agree that the line wouldn't be completely objective because I just don't think we can. You know, I don't think we can escape subjectively completely. But I think we can minimize subjectivity to like the most like.
Yes, but there is a problem that if you are minimizing the subjectivity, but by getting the intersection, you have to exclude some people from this process, and I think that all the ethics should be non-arbitrary. So, and I think this is going against each other. Like if you say that it's necessary to exclude some people from this process, it means that the process is arbitrary.
But you're not excluding the people arbitrarily. You're basically excluding arguments that you're saying are not even reasonable interpretations of them.
Yes, but even between two of us who are quite agreeing together, we don't agree on what is reasonable on or not. And this is something what I see as really a big problem because we have very similar opinions, but we don't agree on what is reasonable. So, so the reasonable is purely subjective.
Yeah, I mean, and maybe in our next conversation we can delve more into these areas where we disagree, because I still think there's a more objective answer to be found with the principle, you know. But we've spoken for long enough, so I don't want to reignite the conversation.
Yes,
and so I'll wrap it up and just sort of say that I've really enjoyed it. I know you say that you found it a bit more of a struggle this time, but I've still found it very interesting. I think we've just delved into more difficult subjects, which has not helped. But I still got a lot of value from it, and we got lots of food for thought from it. So
it was a really nice conversation for me. Thank you for that. Again, thank you very much for reading my book and correcting it. I again thanks to Martin Pánek and Sarah Balnova, because Sarah translated the book like from the Czech to English. He corrected it, and he corrected it again as a native speaker, which is really great. I hope you in some time you get to that bonus chapters, so I can then work with the English person. I am really happy that we could also discuss that book, and I'm looking forward for the next time. I probably will have to find some other time in my schedule to not do it so late and not do it after so hard day, because I was today quite working a lot. So I now see that I need to be in better state for this conversation. But I really like it, and I must say it's even good for me that I have this opportunity to talk in English, because this is the only way how to feel comfortable in it.
Yeah, no problem. Well, like I say, I've really enjoyed the conversation, and I look forward to our next one. So
have a good night. Bye bye.
And you, mate. Thank you.